First of all, I would like to thank you for this so kind presentation and very delicate. I appreciate it very much. Of course, my thanks go to Professor Hiroshi Matsumoto, the president of the Kyoto University, for this very warm welcome, and I would say our joint enthusiasm to continue working together, and also to expand this cooperation to involve more students, of course, PhD students and professors in our joint fellowship program that we just signed. But let me say, dear professors, dear students, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that for me, indeed, it's a big honor to be here at this prestigious House of Knowledge. I would like to start my presentation with your words, Professor Hiroshi Matsumoto, when you spoke last April at the ceremony for entering undergraduates, where you said, "My hope is for you to acquire a broad education and knowledge so that you are able to see the essence of things and make decisions based on considerations from many perspectives. This," you declared, "is how we can cultivate a global mind to meet the requirements of today's world." I believe this is the spirit of Kyoto University. Being one of the world's leading institutions of higher learning, you are a university for Nobel Prize winners and field medalists. And in this respect, of course, allow me to congratulate most warmly Professor Shinya Yamanaka for jointly receiving the 2012 Nobel Prize in Medicine. This is a university also dedicated to opening young minds, to deepening and sharing knowledge in order to build harmony between the human and ecological community on this planet, in the words of your mission statement. UNESCO stands with you in this mission. Our own constitution opens with the following words: "Since wars begin in the minds of men, it is in the minds of men that the defenses of peace must be constructed." Written after the devastation of the World War II, the Constitution reflected the conviction that peace has to be built in new ways. And to quote again from our Constitution, "Peace must be founded. It is not to fail, if it is not to fail, upon the intellectual and moral solidarity of mankind." In the turmoil of reconstruction, these words offered hope and new belief in humanity. They pointed to our potential to rebuild on new foundations through the strength of solidarity. And I believe these ideas have deep roots here in Japan. The world's first UNESCO club was created here in Japan, in Sendai, in July 1947. This paved the way for Japan to join UNESCO in 1951, 5 years before its formal admission to the United Nations. Indeed, we celebrated last year the 60th anniversary of Japan's membership of UNESCO. For 61 years already, Japan's engagement with UNESCO has been guided by a deep commitment to build solidarity in adversity. This engagement has reflected what I see as an essential humanism, a belief in the possibility of positive change through the will to work, to join forces, to build bridges. We need this spirit more than ever today. It is especially moving to say this some 18 months after the great East Japan tsunami and earthquake. On behalf of UNESCO, I was very honored to be in Hiraizumi in February this year to present the certificate of the inscription of the temples and the gardens of Hiraizumi on the World Heritage List, which reflected, I think, our deep belief that heritage is what we are. Heritage is our identity, and that heritage can heal the wounds after such a devastating earthquake. I believe these disasters sum the complexities of the challenges we face today. There are important questions that we ask ourselves today. What is the meaning of progress in this time of rapid change and, I would say, rising uncertainty in many parts of the world? What are the foundations of peace and sustainable development in the 21st century? These are the questions we must address together. These questions are being raised by women and men across the world, calling for opportunities to live in dignity. They lay at the heart of the United Nations conference recently held on sustainable development in Rio de Janeiro. They are especially important as we approach the 2015 deadline for the Millennium Development Goals and shape a new global development agenda. I'm convinced we need fresh thinking about the paradigm of development. This is what I mean by calling for a new humanism in my vision for UNESCO today. This is really an appeal to invest in the dignity and capabilities of every woman and man. Human imagination is the ultimate renewable energy, but so much of it today is untapped or stymied. We live in a new age of limits in terms of resources, in terms of our planet. This means we must make far more of the boundless energy of human ingenuity. We must release the full powers of innovation and creativity to craft new solutions that are inclusive, just, and sustainable. In culture, ladies and gentlemen, together with the sciences, are one of our first platforms for action. 2012 is a special year for both UNESCO and Japan. The World Heritage Convention turns 40 years old this year, and this is also the 20th anniversary of Japan's ratification of this important international legal instrument. Our joint vision is quite clear. Cultural heritage and cultural diversity are sources of identity and solidarity. They are wellsprings of innovation and creativity. UNESCO works to promote culture as a dynamic force that renews societies and enlarges opportunities. The World Heritage Convention is a global flagship for safeguarding sites of outstanding universal value. Japan is a champion here, with 16 sites, cultural and natural, inscribed on the World Heritage List. These include the Buddhist monuments of Horyuji area, Shirakami-sanchi, the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, the Genbaku Dome, and Yakushima. As I mentioned last February, I had the honor to present the certificate for the inscription of Hiraizumi on the World Heritage List, and to witness the embodiment of the aspiration of the Japanese people for harmony between humanity and nature. The 40th anniversary focuses this year on the role of local communities, and it is not a coincidence that the official closing celebrations are being held here in Kyoto. I take this opportunity to thank once again the government of Japan, and I would say the Japanese society, the Japanese people, for their leadership. The historic monuments of ancient Kyoto were inscribed on the World Heritage List in 1994 in recognition of the outstanding illustration they provide of the development of Japanese wooden architecture, especially the religious architecture, and the art of Japanese gardens, which has influenced landscape gardening across the world. Founded in the 8th century and an imperial capital for over 1,000 years, Kyoto carry special meaning for Japanese identity. This city is also woven into the wider history of humanity, and that is why it belongs to all of us. Kyoto has always been a leading partner for UNESCO. The 22nd session of the World Heritage Committee was held here in 1998, chaired by the then Japanese ambassador to France, Mr. Koichiro Matsura, who went on to serve as Director General of UNESCO from 1999 to 2009, my eminent predecessor. Kyoto helped to build the League of Historic Cities, a global network of some 100 historic cities committed to cooperation for peace. In 2006, UNESCO agreed with the Research Center for Disaster Mitigation of Urban Cultural Heritage at the Ritsumeikan University in Kyoto to establish a UNESCO chair on cultural heritage and risk management. This chair works to promote an integrated system of research and training and to facilitate collaboration between researchers across the world. In 2003, let me also mention, UNESCO established with Kyoto University an international consortium on landslides mitigation for societies and environmental cooperation as part of our university networking program. To make the most of cultural heritage, we must start with young women and men. They are already changing the world. We must help them develop new skills for civic engagement and ensure they are part of decisions taken today that will affect them tomorrow. This is the goal of UNESCO's World Heritage Education Program, to empower young women and men to participate in heritage conservation and respond to threats facing our monuments, sites, and natural treasures. Just a few days ago, in Kyoto, a youth program was held on World Heritage, the roles of local communities and youth for the next decade, that brought together young women and men from across the world. I was very much encouraged and not at all surprised to hear the voices of so many young Japanese women and men. In ever more diverse societies, we need stronger public policies to harness culture and diversity as positive forces. We need new skills, new forms of what I call cultural literacy. Culture is a force that renews humanity and enlarges opportunities, provided it is not instrumentalized against human rights. 11 years ago, UNESCO adopted the Universal Declaration on Cultural Diversity, which declares that the defense of cultural diversity is an ethical imperative, inseparable from respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. We must be clear. No one may invoke cultural diversity to infringe upon human rights, nor to limit their scope. But, ladies and gentlemen, heritage is not only about stones. It is living, and it gains meaning when it is inscribed in the lives of local communities. In Syria and Mali, we see culture on the front line of conflicts. Attacks against cultural heritage are blows against the very identity of communities. Protecting heritage is not a luxury we can leave for better days. Often the first victim of war, culture can restore ties that have been broken. The rebuilding of the old bridge in Mostar under UNESCO stewardship illustrates this power. Over the past 10 years, we have been developing cultural corridors in Southeast Europe through an annual regional forum involving heads of states and government, whose 8th summit was held just a few months ago. A force for peace, culture is also a wellspring of innovation. Cultural industries are growing all across the world, but all they need our support. This is the purpose of UNESCO's 2005 Convention for the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, and our work to support cultural industries in developing countries. So, ladies and gentlemen, releasing the power of human ingenuity must start also with education. Education is a basic human right, essential for individual dignity. It is also a breakthrough strategy for peace and sustainable development. On a planet under pressure, education is the best way to shape new ways of thinking and acting, to build resilient societies able to adapt to change and mitigate its impact. This idea underpins the United Nations Decade of Education for Sustainable Development that Japan sponsored and which UNESCO leads. Our aim is to equip individuals with the knowledge, attitudes, and skills to make informed choices and responsible decisions. With Japan's support, we are working to reorient educational programs to train teachers in education for sustainable development and to raise awareness with young people and adults. And we are very much welcoming the invitation of the government of Japan to hold a major conference in 2014 on education for sustainable development. Following Japan's example after 2004, Thailand and Indonesia have accelerated risk reduction education with UNESCO support. Our idea is to empower all citizens to act for positive environmental and social change. So, ladies and gentlemen, in all of this, UNESCO works shoulder to shoulder with Japan. I wish to thank once again the government of Japan for their leadership, and I wish to thank once again all the Japanese society. Japan's commitment to UNESCO reflects values that are deeply held in your society, and that are taken forward in universities by professors, researchers, and students, I would say by each of you. This is why I'm so pleased to have signed this important agreement with the Kyoto University on establishing a special internship program. This opens UNESCO's doors to the talent and passion of young women and men to strengthen our shared values. These values reflect a vision of humanity, and I would say of the world, that is inspired by a sense of solidarity and unity. As you know, the unity of the self and the world was one of the concerns of the philosopher Professor Kitara Nishida, who did so much to marry Western and Eastern thinking and who founded the Kyoto School of Philosophy. Professor Nishida once wrote, and I quote, "Over time, I came to realize that it is not that experience exists because there is an individual, but that an individual exists because there is experience." I believe these are very inspiring words. We are who we are, not only because of what we do, but because of how we live. Each of us is part of the world. We carry it with us and have a responsibility to it. I'm convinced we need today a new global compact, a new harmony, a new sense of community with our peers, with our cultures, with the planet. For me, this is the essence of a new humanism to guide us today and tomorrow, to lay the foundations for a more just and sustainable century ahead. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Madam Bokova. So, I believe it stimulated us, inspired us very much. I appreciate your time for this special occasion. Now we have some time for question and answer to ask her something or suggest. If you have any questions or comments.
お話ありがとうございました。せっかくなんで英語で、I'm not good at English, so if I was impolite, please overlook them. You said culture is identity, and I think there are a lot of traditional and formal culture, such as music and dance. In Japan, no or shamisen is such formless culture. I want to protect them. Don't you think UNESCO should protect formless cultures by giving them authority?
Well, it's a very good question. In fact, UNESCO is doing this. I was speaking today more about the protection of cultural heritage and natural heritage because we do celebrate the 40th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention. I didn't have time to elaborate a little bit more on the other aspect of heritage, about our intangible heritage, about our tradition, about our identities. In fact, Japan was one of the driving forces behind the elaboration and the adoption of the Convention on the Safeguard and Promotion of the Intangible Heritage, adopted in 2003 by UNESCO. And next year we will celebrate the 10th anniversary of this convention. It's an extremely important convention, I believe, in this globalized world, because as you rightfully mentioned, we need to look at our identities. We need to resist the pressures of globalization in terms of preserving different cultures. I believe what UNESCO is doing is helping communities, helping different people, different diverse minorities to protect their culture and to give them more respect and assurances about their contribution to this global civilization. I believe that sometimes people feel very lonely in this world and they want to be respected, they want to be recognized by what they have contributed. We give some of the responses to this globalization by respecting their different cultures. So I do believe that it's an incredibly important work, and I know that Japan is very much into the front run of this protection and preservation, because I can't imagine a world where we don't protect our intangible heritage side by side with our cultural and natural heritage.
Thank you. Is it okay? Are you students? From which department?
Humanity.
So integrated humanity department or something. He's a student. Undergraduate or graduate school? 学部ですか？学部学生さん。So he's undergraduate student. Thank you very much. So any other questions or comments? Okay, so a lady over there. Then over there and you.
どうも貴重なお話ありがとうございました。私は古材文化の会といいます伝統建築なんかを保存活用しようとしている運動しているNPO 団体の会員であります。
Okay.
で質問なんですけれども、京都の世界遺産は、京都の、世界遺産の周りにはもちろんバッファゾーンというのがあるんですが、そのバッファゾーンというのは京都市の不治地区条例というものに、根拠を得て設定されているようであります。しかしながらそのバッファゾーンに住んでいる一般の市民の人たちは自分たちがバッファゾーンに 住んでいる地域の住民だということを知らない人たちがほとんどですが、ヨーロッパにおいて、世界遺産に指定されているところのバッファーゾーンに住んでいらっしゃる方々はそういう認識を持って生活していらっしゃるんでしょうか。以上です。
Well, let me first say that you raise a very important, I believe, question. It's about the living heritage. And I think it's very important to be understood. Heritage, we always say, it's not just stones and bricks. In most of the park, in most of the sites, especially in the urban areas, they're living parts of cities, of their communities who live there. And this is probably one of the challenges in order how to protect and to make the most of, I would say, the responsibility and the knowledge of the local people. It is not by chance that this year the celebration, all the 40th anniversary of the World Heritage and the concluding conference now is dedicated to the role of the local communities. It's extremely important. And there I believe also the civil society plays a hugely important role in raising the awareness, in, I would say, monitoring the developments both within the core zone and in the buffer zone. And you mentioned making a comparison between here and in Europe. I would say that in any part of the world, you can find places where there is more knowledge or places where there are less knowledge, and the pressures of the urbanization and the pressures of, I would say, modernity in general terms affects some of the authenticity of the World Heritage. What we plead at UNESCO always is, even in cases where there is not a particular monument which is described on the World Heritage, there are so many wonderful monuments and buildings who are not inscribed on the World Heritage, but who are national monuments in many countries and who bear also some history and some value in that. Our message always is please protect and safeguard. It's very easy to destroy, but it's so difficult then to rebuild. And I know that in very many cases it's difficult to reconcile the need for urbanization and for some services, public services and authenticity, but there is always a way to do it if there is a strong cognizance among the local people, because after all they're the guardians of this heritage. They're the ones, as you said, that live there. They're living heritage. So it's very important that the local communities are involved in this process, that they know their very particular responsibility. They're not only proud of it, but also that they have responsibility particular to pass it to the future generations. So I think there is still a lot of need in many parts of the world, in different parts of the world, to spread this message, to educate local people, to especially educate young people. Kids in schools, it starts there. They have to know. I have visited sites, wonderful sites, where you see a village or a small town next door, and people, they don't know because it belongs to another civilization, another culture, another religion. I would say that I had an extremely interesting meeting with the second grade school children in Tunisia, where I was in May this year. And you know that Tunisia is a wonderful place of mosaics. The most beautiful Roman mosaics during the Roman Empire probably are found in Tunisia. And I was meeting these young people, and we were talking about the importance of heritage, the same conversation. And one young girl asked me, she said, but you tell us that we have to protect and that we have to be proud of a heritage that we have here, the Roman civilization and mosaics. And she said, but this is not ours. This does not belong to our culture. Now we are a culture of Islam, of Arab. This is not ours. And I said, no, just on the contrary, is equally yours as it is mine. But of course it's yours, because you live on these lands and your ancestors have deep roots here in these lands. You have to be proud of all the different layers of civilization that you have inherited, because there is no pure culture nowhere in the world. The cultures have influenced each other, moving around with the movement of people, of all different empires around the world. But after all, we are human beings living in this world, and we have to be proud of every single civilization that we have inherited. But, and I hope I could convince her, because we had a long conversation and with these young people. So we have to involve young people into this. It's crucial, in my view, if we want to protect heritage.
Thank you very much. It's okay? Okay, she's from NPO dealing with traditional architecture. There's some more? Is it okay? Ready?
ありがとうございました。
So next.
Thank you, Madame Bokova, for your lecture. It was really, really inspiring. My name is Melina. I am a master's student at Kyoto University in environmental management. I'm from Brazil, and I am also currently a member of the steering committee of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. And I just came back from the CBD COP11 in India, and it was very highlighted the importance of culture and biodiversity, and how culture and world heritage and all these cultural traditional values can help the protection and conservation of biodiversity. So actually I have two questions for you. The first one would be, so how UNESCO is coordinating the UN decade on education for sustainability, the valorization and the protection of traditional culture with the biodiversity conservation in order for us to achieve sustainability. And also I would like to ask from you, what would be the possible resources or the possible opportunities for young people or young organizations that are already doing the bottom-up approach of working with capacitating young people or educating young people or raising an awareness among young people. So how could UNESCO start a partnership with young people or young organizations so that we can start work more closely together? Thank you very much.
I think very, very interesting question, and I think I would say very modern question. Putting the link between cultural diversity and biodiversity is something that we really develop very strongly in our approaches to solving problems. Of course, we have the network of biosphere reserves all across the world, and nowadays, if you look at the coverage, the area coverage of UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, it's more than the Indian subcontinent. It's a vast area of the world. We have in Brazil also biosphere reserves, but you're entirely right that unless we tap on the local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, sometimes on knowledge of local communities of dealing with biodiversity, we will miss a big opportunity to do this. I have visited recently in Kenya one such biosphere reserve, the Kayas, where it is also recognized as an intangible heritage. Is the local community. They have a very particular way of caring about their biodiversity, their nature. It's I would say, approaches a veneration of nature by the local tradition. And when we speak about sustainable development and education for sustainable development, by all means, local knowledge, indigenous knowledge is playing a hugely important role. We discussed that in Rio de Janeiro at the conference on sustainable development, and it's even in our final document that was adopted. It was emphasized very, I would say, very sharply that there should be a very close link between cultural diversity, local knowledge, and protecting of biodiversity. And your second question is equally important. Let me say that education for sustainable development becomes really the important issue nowadays. And it has many sides. It has, of course, the notion about environment protection, as you mentioned, also biodiversity. It has a very direct relevance on education for human rights, for human dignity, education for cultural diversity, the cultural literacy. It has a very strong element about risk reduction, risk preparedness. So all these issues, I think, could fall within, they fall within our understanding of education for sustainable development. That's why the UN Decade was so important that we are leading, and that's why it is so important this big conference that we're preparing jointly with the government of Japan in 2014 to bring this message strongly. But let me mention a very recent development. We have been working with the Secretary General, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, for the launch of a new initiative on education that he launched on the 26th of September in New York, Education First. This initiative has 3 pillars. The first is education for all, is getting kids in school, is the Millennium Development Goal number 2, it's making the most of our efforts to reach to the maximum possible this goal. The second pillar is quality education, because we know that even if some countries with a poor quality of education, kids get into school, but then they either drop out or they receive a very poor education, and they are not receiving the potential possibility to develop themselves. And the third pillar, and it's very important, it's linked to your question, is education for global citizenship. Because we think that we have to make the bridge between the second Millennium Development Goal and what will happen afterwards. We have to speak already about global citizenship. The main, I would say, message is once again education for sustainable development. So this is my answer to your question.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Just one more.
Yes, of course.
This is not a question. Thanks and some request. I am Kyoji Sasa of International Consortium Landslide. At first, I appreciate you mentioned about Unity Cooperation Program, International Consortium Landslide, UNESCO, and Kyoto University. We exchanged agreement in 2003. And when I started to cooperate with UNESCO 25 years ago, at that time, Kyoto University graduate, Mr. Dr. Michio Hashizume, maybe you know, graduate of Department of Geophysics. He worked in Earth Science Division and cooperated with him. And also we started to IGCP program, International Geoscience Program, UNESCO IUGS joint program. We exchanged, ICL exchange started to land hazard assessment and cultural heritage. At that time, Hideo Noguchi, also Kyoto University graduate, he worked on the Division of Cultural Heritage. This project is a cross-sectional project, education and science. Before that, no cooperation, UNESCO people said, education and science, no cooperation. But landslide disaster assessment and cultural heritage, it is a very good combination and cooperation with education sector and also cultural sector and the science sector. And so after that, we exchanged 2003 Unity in Cooperation Program, and Koichiro Matsuura we signed. And it is my regret is our Japanese colleague in working in UNESCO left one by one. And no good partner in UNESCO at present, especially no Kyoto University graduate. And this time I heard UNESCO would exchange internship program. As a young Kyoto University student will go to UNESCO, and I hope some of them working at UNESCO. And I can obtain again some Japanese, especially Kyoto University graduate at UNESCO. It is my wish, and please support employment. Some candidates will come. If they are not talented, you don't need to employ, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I just take a very good note. I know that the students, graduates from this university are excellent, and I'm very happy to meet you for all your commitment. I really believe that with this partnership we will revive some of our old ties and some of our old programs that we have started, and of course fill it with the new content nowadays, update them as to what it is, but definitely risk reduction stays. It's a very important nowadays responsibility of UNESCO. So very happy to meet you.
Thank you. いいですか? One more? Okay, please.
今日は大変有意義な講演をお聞かせいただきましてありがとうございました。また遅いこんな時間まで質問の時間を与えていただきまして非常に感謝しています。ユネスコは世界遺産条約に基づいて、人類にとって、顕著で普遍的な遺産を世界遺産として登録をしてそれを保護して、次の世代に引き継いでいくという大変重要なお仕事をされておられるわけですが、そういった仕事をはもちろんユネスコだけではなくてですね、各国の政府組織と協力をしてやっていくのはユネスコがとっては当然のことだと思うんですけども、私が今日お聞きしたいのはそうした政府組織だけではなくてですね、政府組織からは独立した自立したその市民の団体とですね、ユネスコとがどういうパートナーシップを持って、そういった遺産の保護に取り組んでおられるのかっていうことをユネスコの基本的な考え方をぜひお聞かせいただきたいというふうに思います。というのは非常に私事で恐縮なんですが私は従来から奈良、京都、鎌倉というですね3つの都市のそういう遺産や景観保全に取り組んでいる団体の京都の責任者をやってまして、今回も40周年の記念の行事で政府組織とは別にですね市民団体としてシンポジウムを実は11月4日に開催をして、できればユネスコからもメッセージをいただきたいというふうにお願いをしたんですけれども、なかなかそういう非政府組織のですね、行事に対してはその公式な行事ではないからなかなか難しいんだというようなお返事もいただいているので、そういうことも含めてですね、できればやっぱり政府組織とは別のですね自立したそういう市民団体ともですねユネスコが有効な関係を持っていただくことをぜひ配慮いただければと思って、質問させていただき以上です。
Well, I have to say that, of course, NGOs and civil society are very important partners both to the governments, to the, I would say, expert community, to our advisory bodies, to UNESCO itself. As you rightfully mentioned, the responsibility lays with governments because it's an international legally binding instrument. And the governments have responsibilities under international law to protect it. But I know that in many parts of the world, governments use the potential of the NGO community, the civil society, the expert community. I think in most parts of the world, and I know that in Japan it is also the case. There is a strong partnerships between the government, the local authorities, the civil society, the private sector also in many cases. We always encourage all these partners to work together because nowadays we understand that just for governments it's sometimes very challenging, very difficult to live up to this responsibility. And I really regret that you have not received the message. I don't know what happened because I think it's indeed normal, and I'm sending also messages to, there should be some bureaucratic hurdle for which I apologize, but I do send messages and my deputies also to very many of the NGO communities we work. We have a whole list of NGOs, of international, of national NGOs who are associated with UNESCO. So we do have a very strong basis in the NGO communities, and also among young people. I didn't respond. I used this opportunity to the second part of the question also, how to involve NGOs and young people in our work. I think this is the right approach. The UNESCO is, I would say, unique in the outreach of all different partners. Unlike some other agencies and organizations, we have, of course, the national commissions for UNESCO. We have UNESCO chairs. We have UNESCO centers, as we call them, regional, under the auspices of UNESCO. We have associations of clubs and other forms. We have the NGO community. We have young people also who are working very much around us. Every 2 years, we have a youth forum, which precedes the General Conference of UNESCO. And last year, we made really a very different UNESCO forum, youth forum. Young people debated the same agenda as we debated it, and there were passionate discussions about some of the political issues, about the protection of heritage, about education, about sciences. And these young people decided to stay together. They created an internet platform, and they continue to exchange ideas also for the future. And they will come next year to our next General Conference in presenting some of the findings. So I would encourage also young people to create their own civil society organizations, to unite and to work for some very specific cause, because I really believe that heritage nowadays in this globalized world is not only responsibility of member states, of government, sorry. It's really a much wider platform for engagement, as I said, including with the private partners. And I think Japan is a good example in that. I know here the chambers of commerce, of tourist organizations also are joining forces in order to protect heritage. So there should be, first of all, a deep commitment and cognizance in a society. Then we have to have the strong political will of the governments, of course, and then to make all these different partners united around protection of heritage.
Thank you very much. Oh, many hands are coming, but the time is very limited. How many questions can we take? A couple more?
I don't
One
know
or
when
two?
we have to leave, but yeah, maybe 2 more.
Okay, so I like to limit only 2 questions. So I like to consider some gender balance or age balance. Or
This is the right approach.
which is stronger? You and over there. Okay. First, you.
Thank you for your eminent presentation, Madam Irina Bokova. No, I'm Dayamawaki from Graduate School of Economics and Graduate School of Advanced Leadership Studies, Kyoto University, so-called Shishukan. I'm making a research on sustainable development and economic system at graduate school. So, sosial hasil ubas sпросить на русском языке, но мне сказали, что я должен спросить у вас на английском, поэтому я спрошу на английском. Да. No, my question is so simple. So the point I'd like to ask you is how we can understand the relationship between education and sustainable development. So what kind of connections between them? No, it's my question.
Well, it's a question that has a simple answer and a question that has a complicated answer more. So I would say that my simple answer, but at the same time an answer that embodies all the complexity of it, is that in order to achieve sustainable development, whatever technology we have, whatever transfer of technology or discoveries or applied sciences we make. We know that unless we change the way we behave, the way we live, the way we consume, we will not achieve sustainable development. And this begins with education. It begins in schools. We know that we have to change the mindset of billions of people, because this planet is under pressure. This planet has certain boundaries, and we are almost reaching these boundaries. And we have to have a collective responsibility about caring about this planet. And this starts in schools. We talk about shortage of water, and we know that water is a very complicated problem. Water is a technological issue, engineering issue. Water is a cultural issue. We spoke about biodiversity and culture, and water is a cultural issue. Water is a matter of peace. Water is a matter of conflict. And water is a matter also of diplomacy in some cases. And water is a matter of education. Unless we change our attitude towards consuming water and looking at water this way, we will not be able, I will say, ever to reach a more sustainable use of water resources, just to give one example. So whenever you look, education plays a hugely important role. We know, for example, that why we put so much emphasis on girls' and women's education in developing countries. We put this enormous emphasis there because we know that if a woman is literate, she will care more about not only her family, not only about the health, but also about environment. She will know much more about what is at stake. And I will give example with one fascinating cooperation that we have with an Indian college, a barefoot college, which educates grandmothers from developing countries to become, as they say, solar engineers. So they take literally illiterate grandmas from villages in Africa and from India. They bring them to this barefoot college, and for 8 or 9 months, they give them basic literacy skills. They use them, they make them understand also how solar energy works. So they, when they go back to their villages, they establish a very small solar energy providers there. And they become kind of a solar engineers. And they solve some of the problems of sustainable development in their villages. So there are hundreds, if not thousands, of such examples. But all this starts with education. Without education, there cannot be sustainable development.
Thank you for your kind answer.
Thank you very much.